We quickly realized that the risk of losing good people is tremendous, right? And man, if you lose a key person who's really good at what they do and knows the business inside and out and all those things, and they go away, and you think about, okay, how much is it going to cost to hire that person back? What are we going to have to pay relative to the market? How long is it going to take to get them up to speed? Dude, we don't want to lose our good people, right? Like, that's a really bad thing for the company. And so, we encourage people to to come to us with, hey, what is it you need to be better at your job? What resources do you need? Do you need to take a class? Great. Do you need some new technology you're not using? Wonderful. Do you need a better desk? Great. Whatever it is, because we do look at the right people as an investment in the business. And I think the longevity of most people in the company speaks to that.
We are here today because many of us are feeling overwhelmed by the daily chaos of scaling operations, wondering how to go from making things work to building systems and teams that actually run themselves, even as your company grows fast. If that's you, stay tuned, because today's guest, Christopher Kautz, has built exactly that kind of track record as COO at Zogics. Christopher has shepherded core business systems and operations from sales to fulfillment, pushing growth while sharpening efficiencies. Before Zogics, he led sales operations at Backcountry, and later as COO at Level 9 Sports. He guided the company through acquisition, reorganization of teams, and redefining structure for scalable expansion. He deeply understands the tension between speed and sustainability, how to keep momentum going without collapsing under your own growth. I want to challenge you. What would it be like if the next chapter you were pulling out, that you weren't pulling out fires, but anticipating them? If you had systems in place that let your teams move confidently, but not reactively. Imagine 6 months from now where you walk into the office or log in and see that the operating systems are humming, the inventory turns are clean, customer issues are down, team is functioning with clarity, you have margin, time, energy, creativity to spend on the parts of your work you love, rather than always getting pulled into the weeds. That's what's applying what you'll hear today that really feels like. Christopher, welcome to the Built on Purpose podcast. I kind of stuttered through a little bit of that intro, but I think we got the gist of it.
It's all good. No, it was a mouthful for sure. So I get it.
Great intro though. So a little context on Christopher. We worked with Christopher back in 2021, and he's placed as the COO at Zogics, and they've had an amazing ride since then. And I think a lot of that, in talking with his COO and anybody else that's around, he is a major influencer in their success. So we wanted to get him in on the podcast today and just learn a little bit about him and talk a little bit about, what he sees as the success drivers in both, his both personally and professionally. So, but in setting the scene and just kind of going back before you joined Zogics, what was life like for you back then, both work and personally?
I mean, how far back do you want to go? It's how much time do we have to cover all these things, right? Like a lot of people, the world changed pretty markedly in 2020 for me. The company I was at before, Level 9 Sports, went remote in March of that year. And so that was a major shift in how we operated, how my family life operated, how the whole world operated, right? But I settled into that change really well. It actually suited me perfectly. We were going to stay remote there, but at some point the CEO was like, I think we'll come back, sometime maybe in mid-2021. I was like, that doesn't sound like a good decision, right? Like, there's no business metrics showing we should go back, and there were none to point to. It was just, but I feel, I'm like, okay, well, all well and good, but I don't think it's the right business decision. And coincidentally, Deborah from your organization reached out in early 2021 and was like, hey, we're looking for a COO for a fully remote company that's not going back. And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. Tell me more, right? Because I'd realized in going remote, my whole life improved. It's one of those, I hate to say it, but most of the world had a really rough go of it after COVID, from COVID, and that just was not the case for me. My life was positioned in such a way that it was additive after things kind of returned to normal. Better quality time with family, better focus on my own health and well-being, and far more productive at work, just better at my job, frankly, because there were so many less distractions being remote than there were being in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this topic too. We'll kind of stay on this for a second. I think when I see companies make the decision to hire in market or be in office, some of them I have to have respect for. For example, like the best example that comes to mind as we talk about this is, we worked with a company at one time, I'm pretty close to the CEO, and they did child therapy, teenage therapy stuff. And it made sense. He wanted to drive an in-person culture because they were making their money on the front lines by therapists, talking to teenagers, like face to face. Short of situations like that, to your point, man, I have a hard time, some of these bigger companies think they're going to brute strength it into forcing people back into the office. And I would double down and totally agree with you. And again, sensitive to people that maybe had struggles during COVID, probably one of the best summers of my life was COVID, because I spent a lot of time, I will get into maybe family and kids, or if you, what your family's like, but I was able, to your point, spend a lot more time with at the time, she was 3 years old. And that was life-changing. We spent the entire summer in Coeur d'Alene on the lake. I got to work. It sucked. There's a lot of stuff going on. But to your point, and I think what people don't realize on this is from a recruiting standpoint, and of course, we're going to get into this with you and kind of how you guys are thinking about some of this and what's worked for you guys. But most people don't realize how much more difficult it is to hire in market for roles, especially when you're not in a major market. And Zogics, and I know Paul and you the team, once you got there, you're doubling down because you realize getting people to move to that particular city, while an incredible place, you can find so much talent that's not there. But on this, let me ask you this more pointed question is, why do you think these companies feel like in person is going to be that much better and they're trying to force it more than they probably should?
I mean, my only thought on that has been it's a trust issue. They just don't trust their people to be at home and productive. I mean, I can't think of anything else. I mean, I think some people make the argument, it's, we have a stronger culture that way, but I would argue our culture as Zogics is stronger in many ways because we're remote. So to give you an example of that, we use Slack, obviously, that's our primary communication channel. It's our company water cooler. It's our everything, right? We have channels to post recipes. We have channels to post what you've been doing with your family, channels to post, all kinds of things. We have a channel for Zogics Pets. But because everybody is on Slack, everybody knows a little bit about something else, everybody else in the company, right? I mean, people who would normally not interact, like, hey, you work in the warehouse and you work in marketing and you guys never interact, but you know each other because you've been on Slack, you've communicated, you've posted things about what's going on in your life, and we've built a really strong culture around that, in the office you just don't get. But it's funny you mentioned, a lot of big companies really doubling down and feeling like they have to push people back. The peer group I find myself in, who are unsurprisingly all kind of high-achieving professionals, after COVID, all of them are like, I'm never going back. I'm never going back to an office. My life is so much better. My job is better. The company metrics are great. Why would I go back? So all this peer group of high achievers, I know all of them are like, no, we don't want to go back. So I think it does put fully on-site companies in a difficult position in terms of attracting top talent.
No, 100%, especially if you're not in a major market. From a recruiting standpoint, it's funny, I haven't seen anybody do this yet, but honestly, from a recruiting standpoint, if you're charging a fee, it literally, I would say pretty confidently, it could make a search twice as hard. And it's not like we're going to charge twice as much for a search. I don't think maybe there's firms out there that are doing that. Yep. And if so, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them for having the courage to tell people like, okay, that's cool. You want us to move, somebody from a major market, then it's going to be that much more work, because it really is. So when you think about all the other opportunities that were out there, I know being remote was obviously a big factor, but what was it about Zogics that made you say, yeah, this is the place for me?
I mean, the number one thing was just the cultural fit from the get-go. So, Paul and I have a lot of similarities and commonalities in our backgrounds. We're shocked we didn't know each other previously, right? So we were both, pretty high-level competitive cyclists in the early 90s. Both of us spent some time racing in Europe, and that was a small pool of Americans back then. Somehow he and I never crossed paths, but just having that in our backgrounds and then the kind of lives that led to, the first time he and I jumped on a Zoom call, there was just an instant, understanding of who each other were. People who come from a background of racing bikes at that level have something in common psychologically, whatever that means. There's a common trait there, like, okay, you really, this is a core of who you are. And he and I just had that instant connection as a result. But he also built a team around him that had that same kind of approach to life, right? So the other people on the call, when I had the first call with them, it was just an instant, yep, we get each other. So I think that was a big piece of it. And understanding the authenticity of that culture from him. A lot of companies is like, we really stress family time, we really stress work-life balance, blah, 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 work hard, play hard, all, the usual, right? I've been in companies that say that, and you show up on day one, you're like, I'm sorry, what? That's not at all what's going on here, right? And it was pretty clear that was how Paul's company operates. High degree of trust in the employees, high degree of autonomy, hire the right people, hire people that can do the job, and get out of their way, basically. Give them support to do what they need, and beyond that, you're just an impediment. And so he and I share that approach to things. It's pretty clear right away.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And honestly, that's one of the first talking points I have with him, because I think in the background of Paul's background, he has, you can see it in one of his bikes. So that's been always a trigger. Like, even when I talked to him last week, I'm like, hey, you've been riding that thing? That's the first thing. And I'm not a cyclist, but I work out quite a bit. So I know. And on that, like, how much more important in this day and age do you think taking care of yourself physically and mentally, like, how much more important do you think that's become over the last, 10 years? Do you think it was always there? Do you think it's something that, people have embraced more? And because I do think, like, that's funny that you bring it up as the first thing. I think it's one of the most important things too, that's where you guys connected, because he is driving such a good culture, and I can see it just on the outside, looking in and just short conversations with him to catch up. Like, you're really driving a great culture that does truly care about people and gives them space and promotes the right healthy things and habits and food. But, how important, and when did you think that started to happen? And when did it happen for you, I guess, more importantly?
Yeah, I guess I'd say I'm a lifelong athlete. So it was always part of who I was. I started racing bikes right out of high school. And then before that, I was a runner and tennis player and whatnot. So that's always been kind of my milieu, and my, my friends and whatnot have all been cut from that same cloth. But I think that's been fairly unusual or atypical for society at large. I think it became much more of a talking point around COVID. People are like, holy smokes, man, like, we're looking at, mortality rates, and people who are really healthy are not dying, and people who are unhealthy and have comorbidities, they're not having good outcomes. I think that triggered something with at least people who reflect on these kind of things. And then I think the push to remote work for so many people gave them the opportunity. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't have to go get fast food for lunch. I can make something in the kitchen. Hey, I've got time to go for a lunchtime run or walk, or I don't have to commute, so I've got extra time today to do a little bit of workout. So I think there was definitely a culture shift there. Again, at least among people who found themselves in a position where that was their work reality.
Yeah. I think the argument that people have, and I think it's true that when we asked our team, and specifically, like, what do you want more of? And it was flexibility and connection. But, like, you gotta, to me, they're competing interests to a certain extent, and unfortunately that's the case. But the more flexibility you have, to your point, the more, like, you can find ways to create the connections, online. But I do think, staring at a screen, maybe we weren't built, to do that. But I do think, like, the flexibility to, as long as you're taking the other steps to, keep in front of your health and to connect is, it's a total win-win trade-off. So you guys have really embraced it. So talk about this. I mentioned this before we jumped on. Talk about how you guys have really embraced building your team and hiring your team. There's a couple things in there, but what has really helped you scale the team? I know Zogics grew quite a bit, obviously, since you've been there, and a lot of it, is due to you helping create and run a better company and continue to build it. But what would you attribute towards your success?
Zogics, so let's back up a step. I was the first remote hire, right? So previously the company had always operated with local talent. And then in 2020, the company exploded in size with with revenue and growth just because of the product market that we're in, right? Product segment we're in. But after I was hired, I was hired as a result of that growth, and Paul realizing that the talent pool where he's located out in the Berkshires is limited, right? And it's a limited number of people who are going to want to move to, Western Massachusetts, to a remote area. So, he was like, hey, I want to hire the right person. I don't care where they sit, right? Okay, great. And I came in with that as my mandate. And so I embraced that, and we've run with it. So we've made no more hires of anyone that's near headquarters, with the exception of a couple people at the warehouse, because the warehouse is still there. So, we really embraced the approach of best candidate for the role, doesn't matter where they sit. And that started with domestic hires initially. And man, that opened up the talent pool for us. So, we posted for a merchandising role, right? And over a weekend of it being up, 500 applications. 500 applications for a company the size of Zogics over a weekend, right? And they're coming from places like Dyson and Procter and Gamble, and you name the biggest of the biggest, right? And they were applying to work at Zogics because of the fully remote culture and what that meant. And so we ended up with a phenomenal employee who'd come out of buying at Home Depot, right? Like, what a phenomenally talented and skilled guy this is. And from there, it was like, we just have to keep going with this. And as we were growing rapidly, it was like, hey, we need some more support for the team. What can we do to bring people on and, try something different, right? Paul is always about thinking about the newest and different ways to approach things. It's like, let's try hiring somebody overseas. We sit all over the country. We have people all over the place. We don't care what office they're in. if someone's overseas, it's the same to me on a Zoom call as it is if they're in Florida, right? And so that was over 3 years ago now. We made our first hire in the Philippines, and that hire went so well, like unbelievably well. It was like, all right, well, we're just going to continue looking for people wherever the right people are. And, the push for overseas talent really came out of that first hire going so well from a skill set perspective and a value perspective. It was shocking the talent we were able to hire at any price, but especially at the cost of hiring somebody overseas. So it became a win-win for us. It was like, we can hire more quickly, we can hire more people and bring in amazing talent. And our overseas staff, for them, it's been a win as well, because a lot of them had really bad commutes wherever they lived. And so it's like, oh, I get to work home, from home. We pay really competitive wages for where they live, right? I mean, we look at what we pay them versus what they would make at home, and it's triple, quadruple what they get paid for the same work back home. So for them, it's a win as well. Just has become, hey, let's find the best person to do the job at cost when we tried overseas, but now it's just the best person. And a lot of our most recent hires overseas, we've had trouble finding somebody domestically with that level of ambition and background. And it's one of those things that's like, how is that possible, right? It doesn't seem possible, but that's just been our experience is, man, every applicant we get is so good that it's been really revolutionary.
Yeah, I love that. And talk more, because I think this is great. Talk more about the types of roles. Do you see it as, your current employees, the domestic employees, I mean, they must love it as well because they get support that much quicker, right? Like, so a lot of times you're saying, hey, you're running, call it different departments, merchandising or supply chain, whatever it is. And then now they got to hire somebody probably sooner, more cost effective, that is more ambitious on top of it.
Yeah, the team loves it from that perspective. It makes it an easy decision to run with too. It's like, hey, if we were to hire this person domestically, by the time we're looking at fully loaded costs, we might be talking $8,000 a month, with insurance and taxes and everything else, right? Okay, well, we can get somebody overseas for a third of that. That makes the decision simple, right? And they're on, they're integrated into the company just like our employees are. So they feel like they're part of the team, but we've been able to add more of them more quickly as a result of that, for not having to worry as much about the impact on, on the budget. And so, yeah, the team has been able to get much more support much more quickly than we would have been able to hire if we were hiring only domestic.
Yeah, and what do you? It's super interesting that you find them to be even a little bit more grateful, might be a strong word, but more ambitious in some ways too. I think that would surprise me.
Yeah, it certainly would, until you go through the hiring process. And there are calls we get off, and when the candidate jumps off the call and we sit down, it's like, holy smokes, man, how is this kid 22 years old with this kind of a life plan already? Just buttoned up and dialed in and in many ways more worldly. So a lot of our international staff have worked for companies all over the world, right? So they've seen more, they've experienced more, they've got, a broader breadth of experience. And it's not to disparage the American workforce in any way. I mean, we obviously still have great American employees and hire them when it's the right role. There's some roles that just don't make sense to send overseas, right? But the level of ambition is really surprising. And like I said, buttoned upness, like, holy cow.
Do you, in roles where the person's hours have to be reflective of daytime hours, is there a challenge in that way? And the second part of that question is, do you find it, people overseas, especially when you talk about Philippines, you talk about the time difference, are they more effective when they're working in a role where they don't necessarily have to work the same office hours as they typically would the U.S.?
So, it's interesting. Everybody you've hired has already been accustomed to that. So we haven't hired somebody overseas who's like, oh, I have to work U.S. hours. It's like, no, they've already done that previously. So for a lot of them, that's just the expectation is, hey, I'm going to work for a company in the U.S. I need to be available during U.S. hours, or at least some portion thereof. So that hasn't been an issue for us. Some of our teams, it's like, hey, let's have 4 hours of overlap, either beginning or the end of the day relative to their day. And that's sufficient. Others, it's like, hey, we need the person the full 8 hours that we're open. But yeah, it hasn't proven a challenge because, again, I think there's a pretty strong self-selection of the candidates we're finding overseas who's like, they're more ambitious, they're willing to do that work in the middle of the night if they need to get a better job, get ahead in life. And so it kind of comes to
I think
territory.
what most people, because I've interviewed some folks in the Philippines, and what most people don't realize is the majority, and I don't know what the percentage is, but the majority of people in the Philippines are educated with English as a language. And so, like, when you start to understand, there's a whole culture around it, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. So going back to like your transition, so I love, like, I think offshoring when it makes sense in the right way. You guys are, this should be eye-opening for a lot of folks that haven't thought about this, how much success you guys are having. But when coming back to like the transition, I mean, obviously starting a new role is never easy, especially when you're the first remote employee and you're the COO of the company. What were some of the challenges you faced, when you joined back then? I know it's been a while, but, talk about kind of what that learning curve was like.
Yeah, I mean, add to that, I was the first COO too, right? So the company had not had a COO before. Fortunately, my previous company was similar from that perspective. The company had not had a COO, and so I'd done this before. I'd come into an organization that had grown rapidly and needed to implement some process and procedure that just was missing. And so when I came in, it was the same sort of approach. Like, hey, let's dive into everything we're doing and question whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And if there's a better way to do it, right? And so, my initial approach was really kind of like the old school, like soak and poke, right? Like, I'm going to just spend a bunch of time with everybody. I'm going to find out what they all do, what their pain points are, what's going well for them, and, put that in the context of the broader organization, and then figure out how we can make some adjustments to what the teams are doing or what the roles look like. But yeah, it was challenging in that, the company, as I said, it had absolutely exploded in COVID. I mean, from 2019 to 2020, the revenue tripled, right? And, it's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem to have when you suddenly have to do triple the business and you don't have the ability to hire, 3 times as many people you currently have, right? And so it was all hands on deck and just keep the lights on for the year before I got there. And so that meant there were just a lot of things that were getting done that just because they had to be done the way they were done to keep things operating, right? But they were certainly not the best way to do them or the most efficient way to do them. And so there was a tremendous amount of opportunity for me to come in and look at how do we implement some change? How do we get better role definition? Because you can imagine with a third of the workforce relative to what you need roughly, everybody's doing a little bit of everything, right? So it's like, yeah, I understand you're the CRO, but I understand you also have to pack boxes today because it's super busy, right? So you have a lot of scope creep, I guess I'll call it, a role creep. And so helping people really much more narrowly define what they should be doing was a big thing.
Yeah, and talk about
a really big piece of it.
I just want to fill this in because for the listener that's listening, talk about the product lines that you guys were in prior to COVID, and obviously one of the reasons of the explosion. Not taking anything away from your team, but sometimes being in the right place is paramount, and then you guys obviously pulled all the right levers, hired the right team. But talk about the product line and why it was such an explosive growth.
Yeah, no, I mean, we all like to think that we're geniuses, right? When we look back and go, oh yeah, look what we did. But luck plays a huge role in it, right? There were super well-run businesses going into COVID that couldn't stay open because of the product line they sold and vice versa. Yeah, the primary product was, the biggest selling product is large format disinfecting wipes. So think like a canister of Lysol, but like on steroids, right? It's like 800 count rolls of wipes for disinfecting facilities and such, and then other cleaning and disinfecting products. So electrostatic sprayers, so Delta came in and was like, hey, we need to buy $1 million worth of sprayers to clean our planes. Like, okay, we'll figure out how to get them to you, right? So yeah, it was just, it was a market segment that you couldn't sell product fast enough, and you could have sold more if you had more product. So, yeah, a lot of luck went into being in that market segment. It was an overnight success story, 15 years in the making.
I did, once we worked with you guys, and obviously I met Paul and hired you, I started seeing this stuff everywhere, like in gyms. So if you taught like the disinfectant wipes, if you look at it, you'll see Zogics on a lot of those and start to realize, kind of what it was. So I think a lot of the success, we do a lot of hiring around second in command. And I think it's interesting, the relationship, obviously I know Paul.
Yeah.
I didn't know you, obviously, until this call because my team worked with you. So this is why this is fun. But talk about how important that relationship is, because it sounds like you had that at your last job. You're the first CEO, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but talk about how important those dynamics are. And what did you do in order to continue to drive the relationship in the right direction?
Yeah, I think, again, uniquely being in 2 companies where I was the first COO, the relationship with the CEO is maybe even more important than in a company where you've had somebody in that role before and it's a little bit codified, right? Because the biggest piece of it is, as I say, my job is to make sure Paul can sleep better at night, right? I mean, that's, if I'm doing my job well, Paul doesn't have to worry about the business. And I had the same approach at my first job as a COO. And so, having a relationship with the CEO that you get each other, I can anticipate what he's thinking about, what he's worried about. he anticipates my process. He knows how I'm going to run with something. It's that dynamic there is just super important, super, super important. And you don't have to be friendly outside of work. So, my last company, my boss and I got along great, but culturally two totally different worlds, right? And so outside of work, we didn't have anything in common, didn't have any overlap, still had a great work relationship. Paul and I have a tremendous amount in common outside of work, so we've got that bond, but that isn't the key. The key is having a sense of trust and accountability that Paul has my back. Paul's gonna back the decisions I make because he believes in them, but he knows I'm not going to steer him wrong. And just that level of kind of like foxhole partners, right? I mean, like you definitely know that the person's got your back no matter what, and then just given some reassurance, like, hey, I'm here to take care of whatever needs to get taken care of. We're going to figure it out together when there's a problem. And if we disagree, we're going to disagree in private. And then we're going to metaphorically walk out of the room on a Zoom call, and that stays between us if we've disagreed about something, right? By the time we've come to a conclusion, now we're in sync on things, and that's the go forward, and we both toe the line on that. I think that's super important.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed, Paul, this isn't to brown nose him at all, but he's a good listener. Like there are a lot of CEOs that aren't. He's an odd, because I think most aren't actually. Most just love to talk and they come up with ideas, and then if you can rein them in, then you're good on you. I think there's something to be said, and obviously you articulate yourself well, so I could see why the 1-2 punch has been so effective. But he, when you talk to Paul, you could tell he's like actually in it and listening, and so I think that's important. Yep. I mean, and like I said, I've never actually met Paul face to face. We've, it's all been Zoom, and I still feel like he's a good listener. And to be a good listener on Zoom, there's gotta be something there, in my opinion. So, and then when you talk about like life at Zogics now, I know you guys have brought on some different business lines, but talk about like, just kind of the growth that's happened. I mean, what does your day-to-day look like now opposed to when you started? So just give everybody a good idea of like you've grown in your role, the company's grown tremendously, and just trying to share, real life of like what it looked like for you now compared to then.
I think the biggest change has been my horizon, like how far out I'm looking at things. And simply because I can now, I have the ability to look much further down the road because I'm not worried about day to day. When I came into the company, it was all day to day. It was all fire drills, for lack of a better term. It was, I got to learn this, I got to figure this out, I got to fix this right away, right? Because it was like there were things that were just fundamentally not working the way they should have. But as we evolved and started to put, better process in place around different functions, different departments, a different process, day-to-day fire drill kind of slowed down. Now it's like, hey, once a week I've got to put out a fire. And then it's like, hey, once every couple weeks I've got to worry about something. And then it's kind of like, oh, wow, there's something that popped up that needs to be dealt with urgently. And that's been the shift. So, early on, it's almost like you have a myopic view. Like I'm just looking for what's going wrong. Right? To your point about Paul, I mean, he's a unique individual for sure. And I didn't realize how fortunate I was to have his personality as my boss until I started going to the COO Alliance conventions and talking to other COOs, and they're like, oh my God, that sounds like a dream, right? Like, I know that's not at all how it is with my boss, right? And so when I started, he's like, find everything wrong with the company. I want you to find everything wrong, but find what's broken and fix it. I don't care how much you find, I need to know all about it, right? And that was how it started. And he lived true to that. I mean, I'd come back to him with like pages of notes of like, dude, here's all the stuff. And he's like, he'd take a deep breath and be like, all right, I don't want to hear this. It's not what I was hoping. But he's like, that's why you're here. He's like, go, And that openness to fixing and changing things was a key to us evolving the company. And then taking people and mentoring them and finding out, look, Paul, you've got a great team, but not everybody's great at everything. Let's figure out what they're great at, right? I'll give you an example. Our CRO, when I got to the company, he had his finger in every single piece of the company. Right, knew everything about every detail. He'd been there 12 or 13 years now, so he'd been there long before I was, knew all the details. But the result of that is he was everywhere. He was like super scattered, right? And I'm like, dude, he's super talented. He knows certain things really well, but we've got to narrow his scope to make him more effective. And we did that over the last several years, right? And he's so good at what he does now because we've narrowed it to like, he's really good at e-com and technology. Right. So it's been a function of that. We have our guy who runs the Amazon part of the business for us, which, has grown from $1 million to north of $10 million in a year. Right. Like that's a big growth. When I got to the company, he was minimally involved with that. And now he's overseeing that entirely and has a team that supports it, right? So it was a function of process, a function of finding the right fit for people and helping them grow into those roles so they could really just focus on what they're good at and get the stuff out of the way that they're not good at and find a better home for it. And as a result, we were able to run certain departments a lot leaner with better outcomes. So customer service has like a third of the people in it now it did when I got to the company, but we were doing tremendously more sales, but the customer service experience is actually better. Anyway, I'm rambling about all these things, but that's kind of the process, and the end outcome of that has been I can now look way down the road. So we've made some acquisitions because we have time to take a deep breath and go, hey, let's start looking at what's in the market and do the evaluations. But that takes months, right, to make an acquisition happen. We have to be able to have time to do that. And Paul and I are talking now like, hey, what's the 10-year, what's the 15-year plan at this point? Not even what's the 5-year plan, like we're talking beyond that. And again, just having things that run smoothly and require not a ton of my day-to-day intervention to keep things running well has allowed us to focus on bigger picture things and larger priorities that really help grow the company.
No, and that you're not rambling on at all. I think you guys have done a tremendous job, especially as a COO, to delegate and elevate, and I think, you guys invest. You look at people as an investment. And speaking of investments, the COO Alliance, if you don't know what the COO Alliance is, the best way to describe it, it's kind of like YPO, or if you're familiar with that, or EO, but it's for second in commands. And so Christopher,
Yep.
goes to the COO. But talk about how you guys think about investing in your people, or think of, from what I'm picking up in just my conversation with Paul, is he's always looked at people as an investment. I think there's a difference between when you look at people as cost and an investment. And I think, you guys share that in common and obviously have doubled down on that and done really well with it.
Yeah, we've quickly realized that the risk of losing good people is tremendous, right? It's man, if you lose a key person who's really good at what they do and knows the business inside and out and all those things, and they go away, you think about, okay, how much is it going to cost to hire that person back? What are we going to have to pay relative to the market? How long is it going to take to get them up to speed? Dude, we don't want to lose our good people, right? Like that's a really bad thing for the company. And so, we encourage people to come to us with, hey, what is it you need to be better at your job? What resources do you need? Do you need to take a class? Great. Do you need some new technology we're not using? Wonderful. Do you need a better desk? Great. Whatever it is. Because we do look at the right people as an investment in the business. And I think the longevity of most people in the company speaks to that. So I'm now kind of feeling like I've settled in, that I'm approaching 5 years there, because there are still so many people in the company who were there long before I was. Okay, we've hired a bunch since then, but there's still this core group of people who have been there for a really long time. And because Paul's taken care of them and invested in them, and like you said, not seeing them as a commodity, but as an integral part of the machine.
Yeah, talk about kind of the milestones. If you can share, when you got there, kind of where were you guys, number of employees and size, and kind of where are you now 5 years in? And I love talking about this because I think this will give you guys the credit you deserve, and also the credibility as somebody's listening to this conversation, be like, okay, well, there's actual credibility and milestones. But talk about that because I think that's important for people to understand listening to this.
Yeah, when we got to the company, when I got to the company, there were more people for quite a while than actually we scaled down to. There were around 25 or so when I got there. But like I said, customer service had a lot more people than it needed. And we had people in roles that weren't necessarily necessary at that point. But we didn't move on people moved on from us, right? As I came in and the organization changed, people were like, yeah, I think I want to do something different. And it was like, well, great. What can we help you do? And that's the other thing is, like, people don't give 2 weeks notice at Zogics. People give 2 months, 3 months, 4 months notice. Like, nobody comes in and says, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. Everybody's like, hey, so I think I need to go do something different. I'm like, great. What do you want to do? Let's figure out how we get you there. If that's next week, if that's 5 years from now, whatever it is, right? And so, we help people find the next role for them if that's the right thing. And through that natural attrition, we got down to probably 18, 19 people. And then as the company has grown, we scaled back up, and I think we're 35 or 36 now. Shrinking, contract and grow, but we've done it in such a way that everybody is quite a bit more efficient than they were. We can support a lot of growth at this point without throwing a lot of bodies at it. So it's like, if you told me that next week revenue is going to double next year, I wouldn't suddenly need to run out and hire twice as many employees. I'd be like, okay, well, let's just figure out the few people we need to add to support core functions and what other improvements we have to make to the tech stack or whatever, right? So it's also been a function of supporting our team with the right tools and being really forward thinking about that. Paul's been pushing us to integrate AI for a long time now. Like, man, maybe 18 months ago, we had a Slack channel he put up that was Automate, Improve, Amplify, which is all about AI tech and tools and process. And that's been something we've adopted wholeheartedly as a company. And again, now suddenly a person that could do X amount can do 2, 3, 4X amount, So, I would say in some ways, but not in some ways, when I listen to other COOs at the COO Alliance talk about their headcount relative to their revenue, I'm like, that sounds like a lot of people, man. Holy cow,
No, congrats on that. From a personal standpoint, I'm sure you hit bumps in the road, here and there. What are some of the challenges that you can, you're open to sharing, in this journey that you're talking about, and how did you work through them?
Yeah. 2022 for many, many businesses who had an amazing 2020 was a year of reckoning, I'd say. It was for sure the case in the outdoor industry, like, dude, we can sell more bikes and skis than we ever thought. This is amazing. Let's just keep stocking up. It's like, guys, no, it's going to stop at some point, right? And sure enough, you saw a lot of contraction in the outdoor industry in 2022. And I got to Zogics in 21, and Paul's like, we have too much inventory in certain areas. I'm like, okay, we got to deal with this, right? Because again, buying and delivery times are long and all that. So 2022 was really challenging. We were doing well on the revenue front, but man, we had so much product we just had to unload that it was not a great year on the income side, and it was a challenge trying to help keep everybody motivated when it's like, I know this doesn't feel great, right? Like, yes, I understand we're selling all these things and losing our shirt on them, but dude, we got to get this out of the warehouse. It's 2 years old now, and it's like tying up cash, right? But that was a personal challenge because, you don't ever want to feel like you're not winning, right? And it's like, I knew it was the right thing to do. I knew it was the right long-term play. It was like, Paul, we got to do this. But it was, part COO, part therapist, all that kind of stuff, helping people feel like, no, this is the right thing. And I know you don't want to do this that way, but we have to. And we came out the backside stronger, but it was a hard year, man. Both Paul and I look back, we're like, never again, don't want to go through that. It was just tough. It was just super tough. And it wasn't unique to us. And now, years later, as we've looked at the market space, we find ourselves to be very fortunate that we're much stronger than we were, right? I mean, like, revenue is up markedly, but income is way higher than it's ever been because we've just gotten better at what we do. And at the same time, we've looked around and a lot of people that were in our market space are just not there anymore, or they have been bought up because they were on the chopping block, So it was a really hard year psychologically, just like, man, grinding every day when it's not fun. It felt kind of like Sisyphus, just every day I'd push the rock up the hill and the next morning I'd be back at the bottom again. But that's, it is what it is. I mean, that's, as I said to Paul, every time I was down in this, like, but dude, that's the job, man. Like, yeah, it doesn't feel good right now, but that's the job.
I think we all in those times have, like, any leader that's listening to this that's, in one of these seats like this, we all wrestle with like imposter syndrome or doubt along the way. How do you handle those moments?
Yeah, the doubt definitely is a real thing at that point. Like, do I actually know what I'm doing? Couple of things. One is like, if you're not sure, just keep going, right? Like, if you don't know what to do something. It's kind of always my approach to it. It's like, I don't know if it's the right thing or the wrong thing necessarily, but if I do nothing, it's going to be a lot worse, isn't it? Right? And so it was like, well, we're just going to keep going every day. Whatever that means, we're going to try it. If it doesn't work, we're going to cut as quickly as we can and do something different. But, this is a kind of a personal philosophy. This is an area Paul and I just are so in sync. And it's like, you just have to put in the work. Like, there's just no substitute for that. Like, there are times the work's not fun. And like you said, you work out a lot, you get it. Anybody's been a competitive, especially an endurance athlete, dude, there are days you just don't want to do it. It's like, all right, it's 47 raining and I have a 6-hour ride scheduled. I guess I'm going to ride for 6 hours in the rain today. It's not fun, but it's just part of the process. And so you have to take the long view. Is like, we're going to just do the work and trust that the work pays off at the end. And, so I've never been one to feel like I need a lot of encouragement or a lot of like attaboys. I wasn't raised that way. My dad was like, yeah, that's great. What'd you do for me lately? It's like one of those kind of households where you got 5 A's and an A minus, and it's like, dude, really? You got an A minus? What the heck, man? And so, just in my nature was like, you just keep going, right? And Paul's cut from the same cloth, like I said. So for me, it was very fortunate that I had a CEO who understood that sort of is what it is.
Keep on trucking. I mean, that's where the background of an athlete or, specifically in cycling comes in. I mean, you just got to push through it. On 2 Mondays ago, I typically try to hike this mountain right by me in Arizona every Monday. It's it's kind of what I do. It's therapeutic. Well, I showed up at a little before 6 a.m. and it was super hot still. It was like 90 degrees and humid. Usually it's not humid here. And it's 6 a.m. This was this might have been 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I remember in my mind, I was kind of complaining for a minute. I'm like, this sucks. Like, this weather sucks. Then I get to the top of the mountain. I'm coming down. I see a guy on crutches on one leg going up this mountain. And this is like the way they look at these mountains. They call it, it's a double black. I mean, it means like you're basically climbing rock straight up a mountain. I mean, that's steep. And talk about a changing of attitude that I had at that point. Once he walked by, I took a picture of him because I'm like, I got to remember that guy. I've seen him a couple times since, and people that hike Echo Canyon and probably know him if they hike that. But talk about like pushing through and feeling like you're feeling sorry for yourself, and you see a guy like that with one leg climbing a mountain.
Yeah. I had a profoundly disabled brother. He was born a paraplegic, right? And so he died a couple of years ago, but just, watching his whole life every day was hard, every day, but he just kept on going. And it was like, oh man, if he can do it, I don't have any excuses. It was like, he had, it was like, check the boxes of like, school was hard for him. School was easy for me. Basic physical things were hard for him. I was an athlete. It was just like, starker contrast couldn't be seen. I'm like, I don't have any room to quit or complain, right? So you grew up in an environment like that, and you just learn to embrace the hard things. I think I took it to a degree of slightly unhealthy, probably. Like my best days on a bike or my best days ski touring are the ones where at some point I just literally get to the point where, without even thinking about it, just spontaneously at some point I go, this really fucking sucks. And it's like, oh man, this is a great day then. It's like that was a great day on the bike when I get to that point. Yeah, I know that's not typical, but Paul shares that. So again, I feel very fortunate to have a CEO that he and I just see the world the same, because that's not the way everybody sees the world, and it doesn't work for everybody. And that's part of the success we've had too, is understanding you don't have to be for everybody the right place. We had people that opted out because they're like, I can't be remote full time. I get it. It's not for everybody. That's fine. If it's not for you, great. Find a place that is, So, having that sort of perspective that like people have different motivations and operate differently, and understanding how to know to get to those for each person in your team is critical. Like I definitely interact with everybody in the team differently. The conversations I have with some people are very different than others, just based on what they need in terms of support or accolades or nothing. And so I think that's the part of it. But with Paul and I, we just get each other. So that's
awesome. What a great perspective too. What do you think most people get wrong about your role? And the reason why I ask you is clearly, there's a lot of things you're doing well, and I'm sure you're always critical on yourself, as I can tell from this conversation, that's helped you grow.
Yeah.
And you're spending time now, in the COO Alliance with a lot of COOs, but what do people often get wrong about your role, or what does it take to succeed in that kind of position?
Yeah, I think the key to success is an innate curiosity, because you actually have to want to understand what's going on, right? And you have to want to understand what's going on, not just like, okay, I'm going to take a look under the hood. Like, no, you actually really have to want to know and be curious about it, and then have an approach of, okay, what do we do about it? Now we know. Now what do we do about it? And it's it's kind of tied to the adage of bring bad news early and good news often. So find a problem, highlight the problem, and then solve the problem. And don't shy away from it. Just run right into it, head first. It's like, okay, this is broken. Let's fix it, and let's move on to something else. But that takes a degree of curiosity to ask the right questions, to find the problems. It takes a degree of self-confidence to be like, we're going to fix it. I know we'll fix it. I might not know how to fix it today, but we're going to figure out how to fix it. And just that sort of belief that you can fix it. You might be wrong, but you got to try. And so I think the biggest piece of it is just it's mindset. The curiosity and problem solving and making things better. If I look back kind of my whole career path, it's like, how do I make this better than it's been?
What a great
Okay, let's do
thought
that.
for COOs and leaders in general. One of my coach, he's always, one of his things, mottos is like, always asking yourself, what questions should I be asking? I mean, that's how other people learn. It sounds like you guys are doing a good job. Are there any tools or habits or practices that you rely on that you can't imagine working without?
Oh man, tools at this point, I don't rely on tools to do my job for me. A lot of people need them because that's their role requires that. I really rely on my innate curiosity, and then whatever tools I've got at my disposal, I'll use. Right. So, from a tool perspective, AI is becoming a bigger part of what I do, but you have to understand how to use it and learn how to use it. Right. So again, that curiosity. I don't know. That's a tough question. I don't think I have a great answer to that.
When you think about looking back on everything you've accomplished, this could be in life too. I'm not going to restrict this just to your time at Zogics, but you can answer it that way. What are you most proud of?
I would say that I've done it. I've done it authentically to myself, whatever it is. That exceedingly strong-willed would be a nice way of putting it. Stubborn might be a less good way to put it. But I'm definitely have my convictions about how things ought to be done, and I don't stray from them. And it's been in whatever it is, whether it's been athletics, school, work, personal relationships, whatever it is. Like this is how I see it, and that's how it's going to be. I think it's that.
I love that.
More than anything.
All right, we're gonna start wrapping up. This has been absolutely amazing. This is such a great conversation. I need to do more of this with folks like yourself because there's so much to learn. People that have had successful tenure at a business, and then obviously what they've gone through and what's got them there in their life, as you've shared. But these are more rapid fire questions, so there's really no whatever comes to mind. The big debate is it better to be a night owl or early bird for success?
I am wired as a night owl to a crazy degree, for sure. I mean, it's just my hardwiring. But sometimes you just have to get up in the morning. So if you're a night owl, you've got the self-discipline to get up, you make it work.
That's what I
Paul's a total
thought.
morning person, right? I mean, he's sending me. He is. No, man. I mean, it's like, I'm 2 hours behind him. I get up and I've got Slacks that are coming in at 4 o'clock my time because he's up at 6 o'clock, sending messages. I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's make it work for you. I will say the remote work thing definitely works better for both cases, right? Because Paul's up early, he's doing things, he's sending messages, he's not bothering anybody, but he doesn't have to be in the office to do it. And I can get messages late in the evening, I can do work at night and send things back and it's waiting for people in the morning. So I don't think either. I think just you have to make it work in your environment.
And I know this is your remote, so I don't know this question, but I know you guys are very healthy from the standpoint of snacks. Controversial snack take. What's the most overrated snack in the Zogics break room or in life?
Oh man, yeah, we don't have a break room. Overrated snack. I think it's probably like a Hostess Ho-Ho or something
Just
like that.
the sugar.
They look really good and you want to have one you remember as a kid that was the best thing ever. You take a bite and you're like, this tastes like plastic.
And then
I think it's that.
Leadership hot take. Meetings mostly necessary or mostly a waste of time? Well, that
Mostly a
doesn't
waste of
surprise
time.
you from the way you guys have built this too.
No, it's funny you say that, man. When I got to Zogics, I looked at the calendar. I'm like, nobody's not in meetings every day, all day. And so I actually took an initiative where I canceled every single meeting on the calendar, and you can only put them back on if I made a case for them. And we run with so few meetings at this point. And Paul was behind it. Paul's like, I think you're right. I think there are too many meetings. Now, this is crazy, but go for it.
I love that. And then you probably read Cameron Harold's book, Meetings Suck. It kind of got a structure. And then future prediction, in 10 years, will gyms look completely different or will they stay mostly the same?
I think they're going to be pretty similar. I don't think they're going to look much different.
I would agree. I think COVID, honestly, because people are staring at screens more because of the remote, I think they like the old school, CrossFit-ish gym type. At least I might be a little biased, but that's my take. And then I'm going to give you a last word. Anything like this conversation, by the way, thank you for taking the time. I was able to catch up with you and kind of connect the dots. It's so fun for us, being involved and working so hard to find the right people and align people and then to hear their story and for our audience to, kind of hear kind of what's worked and also, where you've been challenged, and you did a great job of sharing that today. Is there anything as a last thing you want to share just based on the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what I said before, is even if you don't know what the right thing is, just do something, right? I mean, just keep moving forward in whatever that means. There's an existential philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre. You probably heard of the guy, French guy, right? And he has this horrible conundrum, or at least people think it's horrible. Your house is on fire. Your mom's inside. Your child's inside. You can save one. Who do you pick? And his answer is, it doesn't matter. You have to pick somebody. Just pick somebody and get them out of the house. If you don't pick anybody, everybody dies, right? And it's like, people go, oh, that's terrible. No, it's not terrible. That's a call to action, man. Just do something. It's better than doing nothing. So I think that's it. Do something, find what you're passionate about, makes it easier. But there are times you're doing things you don't want to do. You have to do them anyway. Just
Man,
keep
I love
doing
it,
something.
Christopher. Take massive action. I think that's wise advice. You've been listening to the Built on Purpose podcast, brought to you by Yscouts. You can listen to all of our past and future podcasts at yscouts.com.